And viewers, just a short while back, Justin Trudeau has announced his resignation both as Liberal Party leader and Canadian Prime Minister. In a press briefing, he said that he intends to resign and won't be the candidate for the next federal polls. Remember, Justin Trudeau's popularity amongst Canadians has waned in recent months, and there are multiple reasons for it. US President-elect Donald Trump threatened tariff on its northern neighbor. And then Canada under Trudeau has been locked in an ongoing diplomatic row with India over the killing of Khalistani terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar, with Ottawa alleging Indian involvement. There are domestic issues such as inflation and immigration, which may have brought Justin Trudeau to the brink of resignation.
I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister, after the party selects its next leader through a robust, nationwide, competitive process. Last night, I asked the President of the Liberal Party to begin that process.
Let's take a look now at some of the reasons which could have, in fact, brought Trudeau to the brink of his resignation. The diplomatic row with India, of course, is most significant as far as India is concerned, because this diplomatic row over the killing of Khalistani leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar had led to Justin Trudeau make a series of allegations saying that India was involved in his killing, and that is something where India had in fact demanded proof which he could not bring out. Trump then threatened to slap 25% tariffs on Canadian goods. Now, that is, of course, as far as the Canada-US relation is concerned, and currently surveys have showed that Liberal Party is losing in the next federal polls. This is as far as performance in polls is concerned. There's also been a corruption scandal. There's a row over the now defunct Sustainable Development Technology Canada, or the STDC. This is one scandal as well, which could have had an impact. Within his own party, he's been facing tremendous amount of pressure, with several of his lawmakers asking him to resign. That count, the last time we saw it, has gone up significantly. Earlier it was 20 Liberal MPs. Now this number is believed to be much higher since the last 2 months, since this information has first started coming in as far as internal dissent that Justin Trudeau is facing. So these are some of the reasons why Trudeau has been brought on the brink of resignation. And let's now quickly take this across to our guests.
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 1 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
Let's go across to our guest now. Joining us live is Peter McKay. He's a former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada. Abijit Banerjee of the IPCS joins us as well. Mr. McKay, thank you so much, as well as Abijit, for joining us this evening. But let me begin by asking you, it's something that many believed is something that is going to happen. There's been a lot of pressure internally. What would you attribute as a primary reason for Trudeau now stepping in? And somewhere or the other, is the perception in Canada that he tried to use, the foreign relations, or jeopardize the foreign relations with India to try and divert from his unpopularity and the issues that he was facing domestically?
Well, I think there's no question the internal pressure from his own party, members of parliament, even members of the government, coming out so vocally against him in the public. The resignation of his finance minister and deputy prime minister, Chrystia Freeland, just 3 weeks ago, prior to Christmas. All of this contributed to him coming to the conclusion, Trudeau, that he simply could not win the next election and could not carry on. It was unsustainable. With the incoming president's inauguration in a couple of weeks, the pressure on the Canadian economy, and including some of the files, quite frankly, that have been handled very badly, including foreign relations with India. So all of this was simply too much. And Mr. Trudeau came to the inevitable conclusion that he had to step down. He was forced into this. It wasn't something he wanted to do.
Right, and it's what would you say about the entire approach? Because it's not just about India, it's not just about US, it's even China, where Mr. Trudeau, have taken things, southwards in a major way. What really has led to this blunder after blunder that he appears to have committed? If you look at, there are corruption charges, there is, of course, the domestic economy, inflation, so on and so forth, and also on the international front. What really led to these repeated blunders, in your view, that Justin Trudeau seems to have committed?
Well, incompetence and not the experience and the ability to do the job, although he's been there now almost 10 years. but I suppose more to the point, putting party and partisan interests ahead of the country's interests. And that is why I quite frankly fear that we may be facing a recession based on some of the things that you've mentioned already. The affordability crisis that's happening in our country, the lack of ability to attract direct foreign investment, inflationary problems, a low dollar. All of this really is part of the Trudeau legacy. He has left the country in a very weak and exposed, vulnerable economic state.
Right. And we also have Gary Keller, who's a former advisor to the former PM and FM of Canada, joining us on the broadcast as well. Gary Keller, many here in India are actually wondering what happens next. If there is a new prime minister or if there is a new regime, how much can we expect things to change, diplomatically speaking, because this is perhaps the lowest point ever that India and Canada have had on that front. Are things likely to change if there is a new face there in Ottawa?
Well, I think it's important to note the timing of all this that is going down. Mr. Trudeau announced that he is proroguing Parliament, which means Parliament will be delayed until March 24th. The government requires a spending bill to be passed by April 1st, which is the start of the government's fiscal year. And so depending on who wins a Liberal leadership, we could be into an election starting on March 27th or 28th, which puts Election Day on about May 5th. Elections have to take place on a Monday in Canada, so it would be Monday, May 5th for a potential election in Canada. And so the timeline for a Liberal leadership would be in my opinion, very short, and that we'll have to see that it goes. So, really, whoever wins a Liberal leadership or serves as prime minister in an election campaign, they're going to have a very short amount of time trying to reset the government's agenda, both domestically and from a foreign policy perspective. And as you know, all the polls in Canada right now point to a massive win by the Conservatives. They are the last poll; they are up by 25 points over the Liberals. And really, I think people acknowledge in Canada for any sort of reset, whether with it's India or any other country on the world stage, a change in government is really needed. Okay. How that all plays out is still to be determined, of course, but that is the timing of what we're looking at.
Right. And let me bring in Abijit Banerjee as well. Abijit, now this is very interesting because, as Gary has just told us, whoever comes in will be in campaign mode. They don't really have the time to delve into huge policy change. That's perhaps likely, if at all, only if there is a new prime minister who comes in. What happens in the meanwhile, because the kind of positions that have been taken by Mr. Trudeau, making allegations without being able to back them up with evidence, something that normally does not happen between two friendly countries. So what are we looking at now in terms of what this means for India-Canada relations, at least in the interim?
Look, the Liberal Party does not have the ability right now to fix anything. It's really crisis management because this entire situation really was brought about by the appalling economics that Justin Trudeau has, Stephen Harper left Canada in a good place. And Justin Trudeau's pretty much ruined Canada, right? You look at the cost of essentials every single day. Every Canadian is facing problems buying basic commodities. The housing prices are through the roof. People are suffering out there. He claims he loves green energy, so he's got carbon taxes which have added to all the miseries that Canadians face. Remember, everybody in that party, no matter what they say, was complicit in those decisions. They supported those decisions as long as the going was good. So if they come to power, even say, assume Chrystia Freeland comes to power next, she's going to have a very hard time explaining why she went along with all of this. How is she any different? In that sense, it's like the Kamala Harris interview when pressed by a TV interviewer, what did you do different? Or what will you do different? And the answer will be, well, nothing. So you're essentially looking at a Kamala Harris moment right now in Canadian politics. It's no different. Labour can't avoid the disaster it is heading. Sorry, Liberals, I call them Labour, can't avoid the disaster they're facing. And Pierre Poilievre is riding a real high. He's whacking Trudeau and the Liberals in Parliament every single day. He makes them look very stupid. He has, in many ways, Jagmeet, lusting after his own pension and the pension of his 20 other MPs, which is why he's not pulling support, has sort of tarnished his own party through association with Justin Trudeau.
Right.
So Pierre actually has it going easy right now. I don't see any last-minute hurrahs or miracles happening.
Right. But Peter McKay, the interesting thing is this, that even Peter Poilievre has not taken a radically different position, as far as India is concerned at least, when it comes to Khalistanis. It is, of course, election season. But do you expect things to actually be different given the kind of public positions that Mr. Pierre has taken so far?
Absolutely, I do. And I think, as has previously been stated, it will take some time to repair foreign relations because much of it is based on personalities and people-to-people type relationships. And so knowing Pierre, I know that this will be a priority for him and members of his future cabinet. But until such time, we are in this limbo. We're in this state of flux until such time as there is an election to sweep out or clean the Aegean stables, if I can use that expression. And I believe that will happen, as was just stated. I think you're going to see a massive sea of change, whoever leads the Liberal Party into the next election. This is biding time. This is an attempt through prorogation to allow the Liberal Party to go through a leadership contest. But Mr. Trudeau simply hung around too long, and he's put his party now in a terrible place. The brand damage that he did will attach to his party because of those so-called progressive policies that have wreaked rack and ruin on the Canadian economy. And so it's really now unfortunate for Canada, but we will have to muddle along through this period of time in hopes that we can get a new government that will again start to reverse some of the damage and put in place policies that work in Canadians' interests. Right.
And Gary, would you say that this administrative incompetence or poor governance allegation, do you think that it went way back to the pandemic? That's when the people started getting, a little flustered with the manner in which Trudeau was handling things. Is that where it all began to go downhill for Justin Trudeau, would you say?
I'd say I think probably a little bit after that point, because I think the shock of the pandemic for a lot of Canadians, it was a shock to everybody around the world, but for Canadians in as well. And I think people were really worried about their own personal situations, whether they operate a business, whether their own personal family situation. And so there was an amount of spending that I think Canadians welcomed at the beginning of the pandemic and throughout the pandemic. And then, we started seeing factions within the Liberal Party. Bill Morneau, who was the finance minister at the time, said to the prime minister, we've got to start walking back this spending to get back on a better fiscal track. And the prime minister promptly fired him as minister of finance, which brought in Chrystia Freeland, who was more than happy to continue the wild spending as Canada came out of the pandemic and while we were way past the pandemic. And so that has been the Liberal Party's mantra, and they have broken a number of different policy fronts, whether it's immigration, whether it's foreign policy, whether it's the economic situation. And so, when Mr. Poilievre came in as Conservative leader in 2022, he had a very clear campaign about what he wanted to do, and he stuck to that campaign script all the way through to the present day. He hasn't deviated from it, and it really has been a platform of hope and providing opportunity to Canadians and more jobs and a better economy and more housing and all these different things, which I think has really resonated with Canadians. And where we really saw the downturn and the change in the polls was in the summer of 2023, when the prime minister was asked, we have a huge housing problem in this country, sir. What are you going to do about it? And his response was, housing is not a federal responsibility. It's the responsibility of the provinces. Well, that went over like a lead balloon. And within 6 weeks, all of a sudden, housing became a pretty big federal responsibility. And so that's kind of when we saw the switch happen and the gap open between the Liberals and the Conservatives was that period in summer of 2023.
Right. And what really happens to Jagmeet Singh and his MDP is going to be very interesting. How do you see that playing out, Gary? Because, a lot of questions, a lot of concerns that all of this, that happened between India and Canada is because of Trudeau's support of the MDP, which he needed to actually cobble up his numbers in Parliament for a majority. What happens from here on?
Well, Mr. Singh has said that he is going to vote non-confidence in the government. I guess we'll wait and see for that. At least one of his members of parliament said, well, I have no interest in voting non-confidence in the government and bringing down the government and putting Mr. Poilievre into power. I'm not going to support that. And so, we will have a confidence vote in the House of Commons before April 1st. I guess the devil will be in the details, whether or not Mr. Singh lives up to his commitment, or he actually changes his tune. I wouldn't be surprised if the Liberals and New Democrats find another way to keep things alive and put off an election until even later. So I guess the answer to that question is stay tuned, and we'll see what happens.
Right. And Abijit, let me bring you in on this, because there are a huge number of Indians there in Canada. A lot of concern when you have these kind of diplomatic rows is what happens to those Indians who are present there, working there, have their families there, so on and so forth. Would you say that now with this change of guard, at least the fear of relations sinking any lower, if that's possible, at least that stands to rest as of now? How do you analyze what will happen?
No, Madhav, I don't think things are going to improve because, the Liberal Party is basically one of those identitarian parties which appeals to the lowest common denominator. They've been playing race politics for the longest possible time. They will continue to do it. Even if they lose power and come back, it will be on the basis of race politics. This is what they do. So, no, I do not see it recuperating, because remember, everything Trudeau did had the assent of his cabinet. If you remember the Washington Post article, or was it the New York Times, which had been leaked, despite the document not being declassified, was leaked by members of his own cabinet, the National Security Advisor and one minister. So, the sheer flagrant disregard of laws, the COVID testing kit contract given to Anita Anand's husband and things like that, they are flagrant. They are in-your-face practitioners of divisive politics. There's nothing you can do about it.
Right. You agree with that perception there, Peter McKay?
Yeah, unfortunately, there is a long track record of the Liberal Party really pushing beyond the bounds. And we saw that as well in the SNC-Lavalin scandal that resulted in another prominent Liberal cabinet minister being thrown under the proverbial bus and she was the justice minister, and she was being told basically to break the law herself. And when she refused to do so, was cast aside. And so we have really entered into the twilight zone for the Liberal Party when it comes to doing whatever they can to win. And so I agree with Gary's previous point that it's not beyond the possibility that even with a new Liberal leader, they will try to renew this supply and confidence agreement with Jagmeet Singh to hold on to power a little bit longer. The election has to be before October or by October. And so that is the outer limits to which they could push their reign of power. And that is still very much a live issue. And so 3 months will be a period of tumultuous campaigning, I suppose, on the part of whichever Liberal potential leaders come forward. That'll be the next question, and the attention will be turned to that. I suspect Mr. Trudeau will do a global jet-setting tour to the capitals to try to bask in whatever glory he thinks he may have achieved. And unfortunately, again, I say for emphasis, the country suffers because we are facing tumultuous times economically, the threat of tariffs. We have to go about renewing ties to important friends and allies like India. We have to take care of a vulnerability in the north. And we have real strong headwinds of uncertainty that we have to face as a country. And unfortunately now we have nobody at the wheel running the country.
Right. I'd like to thank all three of you gentlemen for joining us this evening and breaking this down for all of us in terms of its implications, not just for Canada, but also for India and diplomatic ties between the two countries that have, of course, been friends. Abijit Banerjee, Peter McKay, Gary Keller, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening on Debate Number 1.